Prior to her career in higher education, Dr. Dodson spent nearly 2 decades working for Fortune 1000 companies in various capacities, including market research, product management, and executive assistant roles. Mrs. Dodson holds a doctorate in education from Johnson & Wales University, as well as an M.B.A. from the University of Phoenix. So very excited to have you. Darlene is joining us. She's been a leader in the South Shore community for a long time. She's been on our board. She's currently an SSEDC trustee for our Economic Development Corp. And I'm just excited to have you moderate today. So.
Thank you. I think that I was the first
one of, yeah, I think you were first.
I think I was the very first that was interviewed in this series so many years ago.
Yeah,
so it's
she kicked us out.
It's kind of fun to come back on the
end.
And I may have moderated once.
You have moderated.
Yes,
yep,
I
absolutely.
Did. But that was a couple of years ago as well.
Yeah,
so.
And then just one more thing. I'm going to ask Darlene to just say a couple of words about her agency. She's a sponsor of the program. And then at the end, I'm going to ask Friendship Home to say a couple words about their organization, because one of the things that we really want to do is be able to elevate our sponsors and let them know, tell other people in the room what they do. So
thanks.
Before you kick it off.
Darlene Hollywood, I'm the principal at Hollywood Agency. We are an integrated marketing communications firm located in Hingham in the Shipyard. We do work with a number of local organizations. Friendship Home is one of our clients, and we love working with regional brands, but as well we do a lot of national work. The business is split almost 50-50 between B2B and B2C organizations. So everything from public relations campaigns to graphic arts to social media management, paid social, it kind of runs the gamut.
To our Hello South Shore campaign.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Oh, do you want me to go now?
That's enough about me.
I can sit here all day and talk about me. Sorry. I'm Andrea Pike. I'm the Executive Director of Friendship Home in Norwell. We provide day and respite services to adults with developmental disabilities. Love supporting this series as well as being a part of the Chamber and having so many great fellow sponsors on the South Shore for this series as well. And thank you to Mountain One. As everyone knows, Bob Frazier, who's the CEO and president of Mountain One Bank, is my incoming board chair at Friendship Home, so we're really excited about that. That will happen in September. But Friendship Home is a really small boutique organization. We serve about 200 families on the South Shore. Would love to have you all come and visit. It's a really, really warm, welcoming environment. And once you meet our folks, you'll never want to leave. So come on over, shoot me an email, and come visit anytime you'd like to.
Andrea also serves on our board.
Small
Not
butters
right
right
now.
Small butters right now. All right, well, let's get into it then. So, Lydia, first, your title is very broad. There are a lot of words in there. Chief of Staff, Associate Vice President of Strategy, Planning and Innovation. What does that mean? What do you do? Tell us about your day-to-day.
So the day-to-day is different every day. Basically, I work alongside the president to make sure his objectives get managed. So if he comes out and says that we want to do a Women in Leadership Center, Entrepreneurship Center, then he hands it off to me and I make it happen, which is something that we just established about a month ago. I also am the liaison for the Board of Trustees, and I oversee the departmental budget. So any kind of special projects that are coming on board, it's really my responsibility to take that vision and implement it.
And do these projects, are they annually based generally, or is it a rolling thing?
Typically, it's a rolling. When we do a strategic plan, they'll take certain things, because of any kind of strategic plan, if it's not funded, right, it's not going to get done. So I'm kind of the mother hen of special projects. We've had a lot of turnover at Massasoit in the past. I've been there almost 10 years, and we've had 5 presidents in the past 7 years and 3 board chairs. So there's been a lot of fits and stops of special projects that certain presidents want to do, and then we kind of take a different track. But since Ray DiPasquale has gotten there almost 2 years ago, and he's been one of the reasons that we've been so engaged with the Chamber lately, he's really set the vision for the college post-COVID and moving forward. So he's gotten some really good ideas and put me in charge of implementing those.
Excellent.
And we'll be starting our strategic planning process again this summer, so there'll be more to come.
Okay. You have a pretty varied background too, having worked Fortune 1000 companies, product management, executive assistant. Can you talk to us a little bit about the trajectory of your career and where you started and how you landed where you are today?
Sure. So as a first generation college student, I had no idea about college and high school. And my parents were just like, you're going to go off into the workforce just like we did. And I really wanted to go to college. So I ended up at Bristol Community College in Fall River as a theater major. And I needed work study.
I was a theater major too.
Were you
I
really?
was. Then I realized I wasn't very talented.
But I was a work study student, so they put me in with the theater director, and I was his admin. So that's where my admin experience came from, was just happenstance from a work study job. And as typical community college students do, I had to drop out because I couldn't afford to keep going. So I ended up in retail, did a lot of Pier 1, spent more money than I made, I think, there. But I ended up going through management ranks, and through that you had access to funding for college, but I had to go into management classes. So I'd keep going back, taking a class here and there as my companies would pay for it, because that was the only way I could afford education. So I ended up getting my associate degree in management, then my bachelor's degree, and then I ended up in with my M.B.A. when I went to a Fortune 500 insurance company. It was a large property insurance company. They only do large property, like Disney is one of their big clients. And it was, I kept following the management and the admin experience because that's where it just kept taking me. Wasn't necessarily my dream, but it paid the bills. And I found that the more education I got, the higher the pay. So that's where I kept going, and then I ended up with, it's called FM Global. It's the largest insurance company you've never heard of. And it's crazy. They're in the trillions of dollars. I just have to sit and count zeros when I was doing research. I'm like, is this right or is this monopoly money? But it wasn't my passion. I was just like, I've watched our CEO get another house in the Hamptons, and it was just like, that just was not, I got up and went to work every day, and I trudged into work. So I called my old theater professor and I said, hey, look, I'm having a reckoning here. I want to see if maybe I want to make a total career change. I said, what do you think about me going back to higher ed? It's the only thing that's really been the common thread and where it's gotten me where I needed to be. And he said, let's do lunch. So we went, we had lunch. He said, whatever you do, it's higher ed is fabulous. Just don't get into administration. So what did I do? I went head first right into administration. And I took a significant pay cut, but I started as an assistant in the president's office. I said, if I'm going to find out what higher ed's all about, what a better place. And, 9 years later, I worked my way up from an assistant to the chief of staff under 5 different presidents.
That's incredible.
It is a very strange path, but you use your theater to put on the happy face on the days that it's crazy, and then you use your admin experience, and as women, we are multitaskers. So I think the biggest thing I found throughout that, and I'm sorry if I'm skipping ahead a little, nobody tapped me on the shoulder and said, do you want to get ahead? Do you want to get ahead? You had to ask for it. And that was the biggest thing that I had to learn, and it took me probably a good 10 years into my career before I finally figured out no one's going to sit there and say you've been doing a great job.
And it is ironic because that does happen with our male counterparts.
Yes.
Still in 2023.
Who are less qualified.
Well, you just gotta make your own way, I guess. Going back to the fact that you're the first generation graduate in your family, what impact has that had on your role today at a community college? What does that mean for you?
It's huge. So we have students that come in and they're terrified. You can see them sitting in their car. Like, do I go in? Do I not? Can I do this? So because first gen students, we don't have the language. What's a bursar? What does it mean to matriculate? It's so scary and terrifying just walking in that being in a community college, it's so welcoming, and it's like, you can do this. Come on in, let's show you. To me, it takes away the fear of I don't know how to do this. We speak a common language, and I watch students who. One woman who just graduated last Thursday, she was from Nigeria. She is from Nigeria. She's homeless with 2 sons. She just graduated with her RN. She's first gen. because everybody along the way said, don't give up on yourself, you can do this. You've got barriers and you can overcome them. So now that I get to show people, look, I did it. I came from my mother hawking jewelry to buy groceries. I know what it's like. You can do this. And the fact that I get to help other people, that's what gets me out of bed every day. There's nothing like it. And watching them graduate, I cry. I'm like all 400 students, I'm like the mascara's gone. It's just amazing, amazing.
Well, there's a narrative happening across the country today in a discussion as to whether the cost of college is really worth the return on investment. My husband went to Massasoit, ended up going to UMass, didn't graduate, but he was one of those people that it just never made sense. School didn't make sense for him. Community colleges still sort of get a bad rap.
Yes.
How are you trying to change the narrative?
Well, I think the Healy administration is really helping us do this, and I don't think they realize that they're doing it intentionally. So community colleges are always school of last resort for people because we're open enrollment. Everybody can get in. And so people are like, well, it's just my deferred. I think because we are so affordable, and I've had more students say we've had tougher, more meaningful classes in our first 2 years than when we transferred to other four-year institutions. I think it's difficult to change the narrative because it's not the prestige, it's not Harvard. We don't have people like Bill Gates that fund us. So the way community colleges are funded, it's the state universities get 50%, then like UMass gets 50%, then the state universities get 25%, and then the remaining 15 community colleges get the remaining 25% of that. So we're doing the most with the most needy students with the least amount of money. And even as a graduate of a community college, I always tend to give to my four-year institution. It's just kind of you forget where you came from. So I think people are they think it's 14th grade, they think it's trades. Now with the narrative that workforce development is the biggest thing in the world, and the Healy administration's putting in like $22 million for adult learners over 25 to complete their degrees. I think the value is, we'll get there with in order to get a better job, you need this type of skill development, and then people will eventually see the value in the broader education, the strategic thinking, the critical thinking skills that come along with it. So I think it needs to really be driven economy-wise. It's never going to be driven prestige-wise, and I think that's why we got to students having $150,000 in debt because they wanted to go to Stanford to get the sweatshirt, and now they don't have.
Which you can get on Amazon.
Exactly. I'm not saying I don't rock a Harvard sweatshirt every once in a while because that was my dream, but we'll get there, and I think you just have to keep doing things like this and saying. And most parents will say, if you said you have your children, do you want them to go to community college? They're like, oh, the value's great. I really wanted them to go to Cornell. If you get them to say, look, 2 years, it's gonna cost you $10,000, if that's no tuition. And now we have agreements with Stonehill. So you come to Massasoit, you finish, you go to Stonehill, you get a 50% reduction in tuition. And if you're from Brockton, you get another $7,500.
Wow.
Yeah, so now it's like, people like Stonehill are saying, no, it's a great school. Are you a Stonehill grad?
I worked at Stonehill for
But they're helping us demonstrate the value.
And are you going to be brokering more agreements with other state schools?
We're meeting with a very large, I can't say too much right now, but it's a very well-known business school in the area that rhymes with Schmandice. So we'll be looking at doing a lot more things like that. Yeah, they're on the docket.
Let's talk a little bit more about leadership. How do you define success, both personally and professionally?
So, professionally, I think success looks like have you hit your metrics? I'm a very metric-driven person, so if I said that I needed to develop certain program by X date, and I did, okay, that was a success. If I didn't, was there something that we learned from it that helped us move forward? So it's not necessarily, you know, a win, but if you learn something from it and can grow, that's successful. In my personal life, success is, at the end of the day, have I done everything I could with the talents I was given? And have I made a difference? If I didn't, what do I need to do tomorrow to change that? And being fulfilled in that way, to me, is successful. It took me a while to get there. I'm not gonna lie and say that I didn't like pretty things, and sometimes, my success is determined by a Coach bag or something like that. Those are great, but I think now as I'm maturing and debating whether or not to keep the white hairs or go to the hair dye or whatever, it really is at the end of the day, what is gonna be my legacy? How have I helped pay it forward? Because I'm standing on the shoulders of many, many people, and I need to pay that back.
Well, women are often told that they can have it all. First off, do you believe that's true? And if not, how do you get as close to achieving that fulfillment as possible?
Okay, so having it all, what does that mean? It's different to everybody. I don't have children, so to me, having it all, does that mean I have a house, I have a car, I have, or I have a successful career? My ideal career goal I haven't reached yet, so I'm still striving for that. I think you can have it all if you really truly know what it is you want. If you think you want something that shows other people you have it all, you will never get there. You will constantly be striving something that's not yours. That's not your dream. I think if you really understand the why of what you want, you will have it all. You'll get there and nothing will stop you. But you have to really do some inner work to say, why do I want this? Do I want to give up having a family? Do I have a partner that's going to support me? I think gender roles, as much as I didn't want to admit it, gender roles still play a ginormous role in women in leadership. Traditional, most men, when you're dating and you start talking about marriage and family and whatever, it never comes up that if my career takes me to California, is he willing to uproot, or she willing to uproot her life to follow me? It's always been, a male-dominated, you go where the money is. Right. And I think we really have to begin to, and I think the younger generations are having those conversations, but in my generation, I was in a previous relationship for many years where they were like, well, my career's here. And I said, okay, well, my career's going there. And that's where you have to really be honest with yourself. What it is you want, and what it is you're willing to rethink. It's not even giving up. I think you have to rethink what you've always been told. I was always told that the woman was subservient. I grew up in a Portuguese home. You made the bed for your father and your brother, and that's just what you did. You made the meals. Now I'm like, that's not necessarily true. But it's very hard to break that narrative in your head.
Do you feel that there is gender equity in your current leadership at the school? And we'll all keep it in house.
No, I'm very lucky that I have a tremendous boss who is willing to say, let's have a hard conversation, and recognizes that there are gender norms. And we've had some pretty tough conversations about, I've come out and told him, when you say certain things, it makes a difference, the way people perceive. I don't think that there's gender parity at all, and I think that there's definitely the way things should be and the way things are. And you have to play to the way things are and make small changes to the way they should be. Because you're not going to change things overnight. You're not going to change things. If you try, you're going to probably ruffle some feathers that are still very powerful feathers. So I think gender parity is coming. I think there's a lot more women in higher education than men, but there are a lot less women in the higher echelons. There's only 25 to 30% of women who are presidents of colleges, and it gets Traditionally, they are presidents at two-year institutions because they consider it an easier job. And there are less than 8% of female college presidents at tier 1 research institutions. And I think it goes down to 2 or 3% of women of color. So we are not even close to gender parity, but we're getting there by playing this is how things are, and you have to play in that reality while moving the needle along.
When you mentor younger women, what advice do you give them?
Be honest with yourself. I honestly believe that you have to sit down and say, if you want to be a leader, so leadership to me is like in every seat. You don't have to hold a title to be a leader. I think you have to have integrity, you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to have do you want to put in the time and the work? Do you want to work 10, 15 hours a day? Because that's the reality of what it is. So to your point of having it all, I'm fulfilled at the end of a 10 or a 12-hour day because that's my passion. If you told me that I had to work in the insurance company for 15 hours a day going over total insurable value for so-and-so client, I would definitely not be living my best life. But when I mentor women, I tell them, be honest with yourself, be kind to yourself, and don't measure yourself by anyone else's yardstick.
Yeah, that's really good advice. What is the biggest roadblock for women today to ascend to true leadership? And I agree with you that you don't have to have a title, but for women that really, particularly in your industry, where, as you suggested, there are so few women at the top, where's the stumbling block? Is it families that they're having? Is there?
So it's twofold. It's the traditional gender roles where, as women, do you want to get home to your family and you can't stay for that extra 2 or 3 hours where your male counterpart who has the wife at home is taking care of the kids, and you don't have that, or I don't have to meet the bus, or there's brownies to be made, or whatever. So I think it's that traditional gender role that you have to get out of your head and say, we're a partnership here, and just because you didn't think it looked like this doesn't mean that it's wrong. The other part is, I have found, particularly in the research that I did, women don't even need mentors, they need sponsors. So boards are still very much made up of white men. And you need a sponsor to say, I will put a male sponsor. I will put my reputation on the line for this woman. She can do the job, but I'm putting my name to it so you can trust it. So if I'm going into an organization and I know no one, I have to find that person that has street cred with the higher ups, build that relationship, and then move on. It's very hard otherwise to do it. It's rare to do it without any kind of sponsorship. And it's different than mentorship. A mentor you can talk to, and I think you need both. And I have women mentors that have gone on, they're female presidents, and they're wonderful, but their advice to me is very different than Ray, who's our president, who says...
Yeah, give us a little bit more, give us some examples of what you might hear from a mentor versus what you might hear from a sponsor.
Okay, so my female mentors are, you've been working really hard, you're doing a great job, have you taken time for yourself? Have you thought about going to this retreat to talk about empowerment? Have you gone for a spa day? Have you talked to other women about this? And it's your village. So they're my village to say, I can't believe what this a-hole said to me. Can you believe, Yeah. My male sponsors and male, mentors say, pull up your bootstraps, stop complaining, this is what you need to do. So they're the tough love and the, you need to be doing more of this, where the women are, we're raising you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so we talk about not falling into gender roles, but it's the dad saying, you did this way, and then the mom saying, it's okay.
And I don't think we can change human nature. I think that
No,
those.
not at all.
That's innate within us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it, but you need to recognize, sometimes me personally, I've listened to this should have gone this way, that should have gone that way, and I get too caught up in the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, as opposed to, all right, here I am, where do I need to go? And I think you have to be willing to ask the tough questions of your mentors and sponsors to say, where do I not hit the mark? What do I need to develop in my skills? And then you have to be willing to do the work, because if you ask and then you don't do it, you're not gonna get too many more pieces of advice.
Right. Yeah. We're talking about mentors, we're talking about sponsors. Can you think of one that specifically helped shape who you are today?
Ooh, I definitely have to say, it's the strangest road to where I am now. My doctoral program, there's a gentleman by the name of Jack Warner, who's a professor. Jack was the Commissioner of Higher Education in South Dakota. He's now the president of Rhode Island College. Great professor. He has been there, done everything. He also worked at higher education in Massachusetts, so he's the one that would sit there and tell you about the way things really are, and as a woman, what you need to do. He's mentored several female presidents. He had a guest speaker coming into the class, and just so happened that guest speaker was also in the running for the president at the college, and I was running the presidential search, who was Ray Pasquale. So I went to our board chair and I said, might be a conflict of interest here. I've got a guest speaker in my class. Turns out it's Jack's best friend. Ray ends up getting the job, so I've got two male mentors who were best friends, who couldn't be more different, who really have said, I told them, I said, I want to be a college president. That's what I want to be. And they have made it their job to say, all right, we'll get you there.
Yeah.
And here's what you need to do. And one is more of Jack is the friend, mentor, college professor, and Ray is obviously my boss,
right,
and a professional mentor to say, here's where you need to go, and here's what we can do to help develop where you need to be. So I'm incredibly blessed to have two male mentors who are willing to listen to a very opinionated woman who studied, women's studies and female leadership. So I've got two men in their mid to late 70s who are willing to take a look and say, we have privilege, and they're going to use their privilege in a different way. That's rare.
Yeah,
It's very rare.
Well, I feel like we've gotten a really good idea of your leadership style and where you're going. I want to go back to the school a little bit, because it's interesting where we're in post-COVID time. Where are students today? What have they lost? What have they gained?
Ooh, so COVID, we are down enrollment, I'd say 40% from where we were about 4 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. And that is not just our college, that's across the board for 90% of community colleges and state universities. So I think the students who can afford to go to different colleges are there. The ones that are the traditional student whose families have saved and said you're going to go to college, they're going back. And some places enrollments are actually increasing. Privates have the benefit of tuition discounting. So
And endowments.
Exactly, right? $100 billion
Right.
in endowments, whereas we are state funded, so we don't have that, and it's also a formula funding to some extent. So the less students you have, the less money you get, the less you can market to the students, and there's fewer students.
Okay.
It's also the perfect storm. So the demographic cliff that we've been talking about in higher education for 20 years, 25 years, has hit. There's just not the 18-year-olds that there used to be anymore. And we knew that this was going to happen years and years and years ago. But higher ed traditionally is it's very slow. They're traditional, this if you build it, they will come type thing. And we had the demographic cliff, we had COVID, and now we have the devaluing of an education. So we have all of these things hitting us, but I think we're coming to a point now where people, they've run out of funding, they're not getting the funding anymore. They need a job, and so the workforce skills are coming back. So we're seeing more skill development as opposed to enrollment right now.
Okay.
It's starting to come back up. Students also can learn differently. They can learn online. We have students, we have just graduated one from California. So yes, they took it online. So we have to be almost everything to everyone, and it's very difficult with very limited funds. I think students have become more savvy, and they'll pick and choose the skills that they feel like they need and come back, as opposed to saying, I need this degree to fulfill a certain thing. So we have to be more nimble, and I think that is the blessing of COVID in the higher ed age. We learned to pivot on a dime, and that is not, I mean, higher ed is the Titanic, and they saw the iceberg going and just never did anything about it. Once we hit the iceberg, we got the life rafts out pretty quick. And I think no longer can higher ed say, we can't do that, or it takes too long, or we need a 45-year study, or we need 65 PhDs to pontificate on why we can't. I always laugh and tell Bray, we admire a problem to death. We can sit there and tell you all the reasons why this went wrong, but no one's doing anything, about it. So back to your point, that's my job. I'm all right, we've admired it, what are we doing about it?
Can I ask one?
Yeah, one more question, then we'll open it up for audience.
And this is just something you and I talked briefly about it. I said I wanted to bring this question up because I'm just obsessed with the idea of AI and how it's impacting things, particularly in higher ed. How is the school grappling with this, and where do you see, what's the future of AI in higher ed?
Okay, so it's not going away. It's very different at a research institution than it is at a community college.
Yeah.
So in research institutions, they're finding that students can learn from it how to, program, how to work with it, to program it, to make it smarter and more. So they're really in the science base. In a community college, we find that a lot of students will try to say, hey, I need a paper on Shakespeare and write, so it's changing the way our professors are. Professors are professors for a reason, and God love them, I could never do what they do. But they can read a paper, know that you wrote it, or some computer wrote it. So they have to rethink the way that they've kind of taught. You can ask AI certain things and you'll get an answer, but now they're switching to more practical. So if you build a project, so you can't have AI tell you, build me a project. You have to actually tell a student, build me a project around, and that's where the learning outcome assessment will be. We are also, putting in tools so that professors can, at first everybody was like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. And then you had those few professors that say, wait, here's another way to look at it. And so I think it's a balance. I think what scares me is it's getting so far ahead that the humans are eventually not going to be able to keep up with it. But I think for practical reasons, it's making our teachers more savvy. It's making our students learn a different way. And I think, especially at a community college where students haven't had the benefit of necessarily the best education before they got to us. A lot of them are coming in developmentally. It's a wonderful tool as long as it's like the internet, right? Yeah. So when we first got the internet, those who were old enough to remember AOL and dial-up, it was this great universe, but now we know that you can't ask Google anything and it's always true.
Right.
So we're at that point with AI, but it's just so rapidly developing that this morning you read something on the news and you think you've got it figured out, and it changes by 5 o'clock news. Higher ed, again, before COVID, could not handle it's too fast. Now they're like, all right, we got this. We've implemented some tools and we can, behind the scenes tell if students have used certain chat GPT or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think in general, our college, that we have a group of professors who kind of grabbed the bull by the horns, created a little group and said, let's talk about this, let's bring in the students, how do you use it, how do we work together? So it really is a learning community as opposed to some schools have taken you cannot use it, you will be immediately expelled and your life will be over, and you can't work like that. I mean, it's a reality that's here.
Yeah.
And so I want to say almost our community college is bohemian in that respect. They're like, hey, bring it on in, let's explore it. And then you have, your straight-laced people who are like, oh no, this is terrible. But that's the great thing about higher ed. You have this, civil discourse, and you can talk about it with AI, you can talk about it with politics to a certain extent. Women's, leadership, or you can, it's an environment to learn, and I think that that's something that we're desperately trying to come back to, because everything is so divisive. And something like AI brings everybody back to the table to talk about it. So don't fear it, but use it to your advantage.
Harness the power of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Excellent.
Cool. We'll open it up. Can I take the first stab at the question? Okay. So I know you mentioned this very briefly at the very beginning, but can you tell us a little bit more about the Women's Leadership Initiative or center that you launched, or that you are in the process of launching?
So we launched it about a month ago. We had about 50 women leaders, including the former and current lieutenant governors there. We had Shauna O'Connell, who is the mayor of Taunton, and also a Massasoit alumna. So we talked about, this is what we want to do. We want to build a center for women to develop their entrepreneurial skills, do a incubator space for women, and it doesn't necessarily have to be all women, but we're gearing toward women. If you want to build a business, how do you go about doing that? If you need a mentor, come to our place. Or we do speaker series, so we're actually having the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development on the 27th of June at our Canton campus, and I'll send you the information if anybody wants to attend.
Yeah,
So it really is just another way women can collaborate together and utilize each other's skills and talk about, we want to do a marketing. Say you want to build a business and you need a marketing plan, we'd have you come in and talk about, here's how you could build something like that. It's really pulling the threads of the community together so that women can rise up and develop their own
I have a question. So you spoke earlier about being under certain leadership that wasn't tapping you on the back and asking you if you wanted to rise to the occasion. Throughout your career, is that more the male leadership that's not doing it, or the female leadership that's not doing it? Because I think that it can be both, and I've experienced both at different times. So because women still want to stifle each other. So what is the experience that you've had around that?
So, great question. I've heard it called the queen bee syndrome, so you want to be the queen bee, right? And I find that it's happened to me mostly when I have somebody who we were on the level playing field and we were both reaching for the same job, and as opposed to saying, hey, congratulations if you got it, or you fight each other because you want that promotion, and it's hard to it's very hard not to be competitive. But I've found that I do better and I actually advance when I'm doing for the greater good. I've worked for women who had the queen bee syndrome that were, do not outshine me, make sure that you dull your light, and then I finally figured out those are not the environments that are healthy for anybody, and they've actually luckily moved on before I had to. But I think it's more hurtful when it happens as a woman and another woman does it to you. And I think it's difficult to call out. I find it easier to call my male counterparts out and say, hey, when you do that, that's not great for anybody. I think if you say to a woman, depending on how receptive she is to her criticism, you can.
If she's the queen bee, she's not taking that.
No, not at all. And it comes from knowing your audience.
Sneak out. Thank you
It's
so
lovely to
much.
meet you.
I do. Oh, go please.
I'm curious with it sounds like you're so much
in most of the rooms of these big conversations, and you're really on a trajectory to be in even bigger conversations. And with higher ed and the climate the way it is now, I'm finding in higher ed that there's so many systems at play, especially with first generation students. In the smaller colleges and the niche colleges and the community colleges, when it comes to more social services concerns like housing instability, food insecurities, and I'm just curious what conversations you're having at Massasoit around that. You mentioned higher ed really likes to talk about the problem but not the solution. Yes, I'm just curious, like, is there advice you're giving to people, or are there conversations you're having that would be productive for others in higher ed to know about?
So we are very progressive in that realm. So we really serve the predominant underserved populations.
Mm-hmm.
We have a food pantry on campus, which is incredibly beneficial. We helped take the stigma away. So we actually have faculty and staff who use the food pantry as well. And it's not something like, people put it in a corner as something to be ashamed about. We're like, no, come to the pantry. We've got great things. We have a clothing closet. We as an institution of higher education cannot afford to provide mental health counselors on our payroll. So we partner with people in the community to provide. So they sit on our, so WIC is on our campus. We have, Weymouth Counseling on our campus. So we partner with people to have the services there because students mostly are bused there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we can't say, that's great, I'm sorry you're having a mental crisis, hop on a bus and, try to make it to the next. So we've found that partnering with community is the best way to provide resources for people and those wraparound services. And to take the stigma away of talking about it is another really good way. But you have to absolutely understand that you cannot fund everything. You have to find creative ways to do it. And I think that that has been incredibly powerful for our community. Even during COVID, when the college was closed, we had people in there leaving bags out on the sidewalks, or we were sending gift cards, sending diapers. It was just, by any means necessary, we'll get those students across the stage. But you have to think very differently. I know a lot of people say, and mental health is one of the biggest crises facing everybody, not just higher ed. But to say that you can fund 5 people at $100,000, it's just not feasible. So you have to. And telehealth has been another fabulous, thank God for that.
So my question, I guess, would kind of be on the reverse side of Andrea's question in terms of when you're in a situation with other women where there's a power dynamic, how do you go about building that village or that sense of community with other women, considering that I feel like a woman in leadership is just different. The vantage point, the perspective, it's having that sense of community can inform a completely different perspective than if you were to do that with your male counterparts. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you have for building that community, especially as a young person who is wanting to call on the experience of, my I guess you could say my colleagues, but also on the wisdom of people who have gone ahead of me?
So in my personal experience, what I've done is I've asked for help and said, I really admire where you are, or I would love to hear your story on how did you get there. 90% of the time, they're more than happy to share. Like our board chair, she is phenomenal. She, Ann Sullivan, is the president of Metro Equipment. She does building. Like she's in a construction company, and she's amazing. She is so willing to sit down and mentor anybody and talk about, have the discussion how she got where she got. If she doesn't have time, she's like, what? I know somebody who would be great with you. Women are wonderful at networking, I think, in a different level than men. Like men do it on the golf course, we kind of do it, over coffee. So I think if you ask, and if you want a mentor, you ask and say, would you be willing to mentor me, or know somebody who would? And I think the village builds organically over time. So our Women's Center is started small, and we're starting to see, the seeds are being planted. And my hope is that we have a room full like this, that we can all get together and say, oh, that was a great initiative, how did you make out with so-and-so? And you just keep building it layer by layer, but don't be afraid to ask.
Thank you.
I've been trying to think of a good way to phrase this, but sorry if it comes out like kind of choppy, but what's the best way to kind of like advocate internally, whether it's in a corporate space or in a nonprofit or in higher education, for your own like professional development and then also like volunteerism? How do you kind of advocate within your organization?
Okay, so you always want to bring it back to their mission. So as much as it's going to benefit you, they need to know how it's going to benefit them.
Yeah.
So if you say, I'm really interested in attending this professional development seminar, and this is how it's going to help this initiative within the organization, or help us achieve this goal. I think that's the way. I hate to say angle, but that's the way to go about it. As far as volunteerism, if it's something that you want to do on your own, you can always go and say, hey, look, I just wanted to let you know I'm doing this. I'd be proud to wear the company shirt. Always bring it back to how is it going to benefit the organization. And I'm not saying you're doing it disingenuously, but it's at the end of the day, they're a business with a bottom line. And I think if you demonstrate to them the value of why that professional development or volunteerism will help them in the long run, you end up getting more than you bargained for. So really think it through, because, for example, I was sitting around the table, to your point about being brought to tables, I had to ask to be brought to a table. Like, do you mind if I sit in? I'd be really interested in. We were at Cabinet a couple months ago, and I said, okay, who's doing something about Juneteenth? And there were crickets around the table. And I was quickly voluntold. I was now responsible for what we were doing for Juneteenth. So you really have to just, before you open up your mouth, think 5 steps ahead.
Great advice.
Right. Yeah, Megan.
Can I just have?
Yeah.
What's
One last question.
what's like your North Star or your values? If you were to give 2 or 3, or what your North Star, what's kind of maybe your purpose, however you describe that.
That's a great question. Fulfilling my purpose is it's deeply personal, is making sure anybody who wants an education gets it. I won't preach to somebody who's like, I don't care to hear your message, that's fine, but at the end of the day, if I'm honest with myself and I have made a path for other people to have access to what I've been able to, and it was happenstance how it happened to me. But if I'm clearing paths for anyone to get an education, particularly women, but and we're actually losing men of color at an alarming rate. So anyone that wants an education, if I at the end of the day have cleared a path in some small way to get there, that's my passion, that's my purpose. And I think I don't need to retire from that. That'll be what I do until I'm, blessed at 101 like my great grandmother or whatever. But that's my driving force. And on the personal side, if at the end of the day I'm home on the couch with my dog and there's just a sense of peace, I don't need a TV on to distract me. I can just sit. When I sit with a calm mind, personally, that's fulfilling to no living end. And professionally, if I've cleared that path, tell me this. You got me the week after graduation, so I'm still on that. You got me the second week of September, and I'm like, okay. But that to me is the true north. Great question. Great answer. I'm going to steal that if you don't mind.
I think we all are.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you're welcome to stay for another cup of coffee. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you so
I really
much.
appreciate your time.